I'm sure that most of you were as befuddled as I was when President Trump's FBI Director Kash Patel and his Deputy Director Dan Bongino, who we all respect, came out and told us that Jeffrey Epstein definitely killed himself. They told us that they've looked at the files and definitely conclude that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. Case closed. No further investigation needed. Wait, what? Let's listen. And what I want you to focus on here is the body language. A lot of people have been commenting on this.
You said Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. People don't believe it.
Well, I mean, listen, they have a right to their opinion, but as someone who has worked as a public defender, as a prosecutor, who's been in that prison system, who's been in the Metropolitan Detention Center, who's been in segregated housing, you know a suicide when you see one, and that's what that was.
He killed himself. You want me to? I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
Dan Bongino looks like a hostage here. Kash Patel clearly knew this answer was coming. Answer clearly scripted. Let's see, he says he's worked in public housing, has seen the inside of all these prisons, including the Metropolitan Correctional Center, where Jeffrey Epstein was being held. So he says he knows what a suicide looks like. But there hadn't been a suicide at the Metropolitan Correctional Center since 1988. So I don't know how many suicides in prison he could have seen. Did he see a lot of suicides in public housing? Now, I like both Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, but does it look like these guys are telling the truth to you? These guys are very poor liars, which I guess is good. Reflects well on their character that they're not good liars.
There are 17 different things a guy can do when he lies to give himself away. Guy's got 17 pantomimes. Woman's got 20. Guy's got 17. But if you know them, like you know your own face, they'd be lie detectors all to hell.
He killed himself. You want me to? I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
Also, look at how quickly Maria here moves on to the next topic.
I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
I know it's hard work, but you promoted Stephen Jensen, the architect of the FBI's overzealous January 6th investigation.
No follow-up questions. Let's see that again.
I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
I know it's hard work, but you promoted Stephen Jensen.
Just moves instantly right into the next topic. Let's see, this is a human sex trafficking enterprise involving underage girls. And so far, after all of these years, we've only seen one conviction, that being of Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's paramour, confidant, and facilitator of this activity. She was the one coordinating all of this on behalf of Epstein. But what about all these people, all these powerful people, these politicians, these billionaires who Epstein and Maxwell were trafficking these underage girls to? So far, we've only seen one prosecution of Ghislaine Maxwell. But they had clients, they had customers. Why was only Ghislaine Maxwell prosecuted? No prosecutions of Bill Clinton, of Bill Gates, of Prince Andrew, who were all regular guests of Jeffrey Epstein, who took regular trips with Jeffrey Epstein on the Lolita Express. Bill Gates' marriage to Melinda Gates seems to have broken up over this. I guess Melinda Gates noticed that Bill Gates was not actually where he had told her he was. She probably discovered that he was off gallivanting with Epstein, because their marriage broke up when it became worldwide news that Bill Gates used to hang out a lot with Jeffrey Epstein. But so far, only one prosecution of Ghislaine Maxwell. No prosecution of their powerful and very wealthy customers. So let's see, just 35 days after his arrest for sex trafficking of underage girls to very powerful and wealthy people, Jeffrey Epstein conveniently was found dead in his jail cell on August 10th of 2019 at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. And the official account was that he hung himself with his bedsheet from his bunk bed. Now, already this sounds pretty suspicious. Pretty tough to hang yourself with a bedsheet from your bunk bed with your feet still on the floor. I guess it's possible. So we're told that Jeffrey Epstein was found hanging from his bunk bed with this sheet tied around his neck, legs, I guess, limp on the floor. Sort of a gentle hanging, I guess. But then we have this autopsy, this incredibly gruesome autopsy that tells us that Epstein's neck was broken in 3 places. Sounds like a gorilla got a hold of Epstein and broke his neck. Kind of twisted his head around, this gorilla. And forensic medical experts tell us that these neck fractures are completely inconsistent with hanging, especially this kind of hanging, this gentle hanging from the bunk bed with the sheet. Plus, security cameras at the prison that were supposed to be monitoring Epstein's cell, he was supposedly on suicide watch, conveniently, magically went down as Epstein was being killed. So we couldn't see who might have been going in and out of Epstein's cell. And guards were supposed to be watching Epstein's cell because he was on suicide watch. They were supposed to be checking on Epstein every 30 minutes. But we're told one guard fell asleep and another guard was playing video games somewhere for hours. So they hadn't checked Epstein for hours. Also, Epstein was supposed to have a cellmate. But Epstein's cellmate was moved to another cell shortly before Epstein was killed. And Epstein was not given another cellmate. Pretty uncommon not to have a cellmate in an overcrowded prison situation, unless you've been put in solitary confinement. But Epstein was supposedly on suicide watch. It had only been 35 days since his arrest. So he was on suicide watch. He was supposed to have a cellmate. But his cellmate was moved to another cell at precisely the right time to allow for the killing of Jeffrey Epstein. Odd. And look at all these bed linens here. If Epstein was on suicide watch, he wasn't supposed to have bed linens. He wasn't supposed to have anything with which he could hang himself. Wasn't supposed to have cords or wires all around his cell, which we have here. Here we see cords. These are cords for his sleep apnea machine. Let's hear what world-renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Bodden has to say about this.
So in 1,000 cases that you've reviewed in the New York State prison system since Attica,
right,
you've never seen a 3-bone fracture in a suicide.
That's correct.
Michael Bodden, Dr. Michael Bodden, was the chief medical examiner for New York City.
So I've been reviewing all the records since Attica as to when a suicide occurs. We haven't, in New York State's prison, seen that kind of fractures, number one.
You also say that the wounds on Epstein's neck, and we have pictures of those, as we caution you, these are disturbing pictures, do not match the noose that was found in his cell.
That's right. There are a number of things on the noose. The noose is a very narrow noose, and there's a little imprint on one of the nooses of a pressure of a mark.
Epstein was clearly strangled by a cord or a thin rope, not a soft cloth bedsheet. Exactly what files were Kash Patel and Dan Bongino looking at here? This was clearly a professional hit, not a suicide by hanging with a bedsheet. Any idiot can see this. And of course, we don't have the results of any DNA tests because all the files have disappeared or have not been made public, as promised by Attorney General Pam Bondi and as promised by FBI Director Kash Patel. In fact, let's hear Dan Bongino himself on this before he took this job as Deputy Director of the FBI.
Listen, that Jeffrey Epstein story is a big deal. Please do not let that story go. Keep your eye on this. Catherine Rumler, we need to keep the heat on this case, folks. There are a lot of people who are knee deep in the Washington swamp who are not telling you the truth about serious allegations out there that Epstein may have had video and audio of people out there doing things they shouldn't have been doing. And you should be asking yourself the question, how is it that all these people, the CIA director, the Obama fixer, Bill Clinton, all intersected paths with Jeffrey Epstein? Jeffrey Epstein isn't with us anymore, and nobody seems to want to talk about it. Outside of a few entrepreneurial media outlets saying, hey, this is a big deal.
You want me to? I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
Also, Jeffrey Epstein was a narcissist. Narcissists don't typically kill themselves. They love themselves too much for that. Plus, he believed he was getting out of prison soon. His mood was reported to be upbeat. Now, most people who have followed this closely believe that Jeffrey Epstein's primary business was a blackmail operation. He was in the business of blackmailing wealthy and powerful people to get what he wants. And many smart people believe that he was conducting blackmail operations on behalf of the CIA and on behalf of Israeli intelligence. And this is the thesis of Whitney Webb's tremendous 2-volume work, One Nation Under Blackmail. She lays out her case in 1,000 pages. And anyone who's studied the CIA and the history of the CIA knows that the CIA, that a common practice, a standard practice of the CIA, is to set honey traps to blackmail people into doing what the CIA wants them to do.
Why do you think Epstein had that giant painting of Bill Clinton in a dress in his foyer. That painting is like, I got you, bitch. That's what that is.
Oh, right.
You got a president who was on the flight logs 26 times with Epstein, and you got that guy in a fucking dress in your house.
That is terrifying.
That's terrifying. Imagine if I knew some horrible dark secrets about you and you came over my house and I have a giant painting of you right when you walk into the front door.
Yeah.
Of you in a dress.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, buddy.
Hi, welcome.
Yeah.
You're right.
How fucking terrifying that would be?
That's terrifying.
I mean, you walk right in and bam, there's that painting.
And now you kind of control a president.
Holy shit, dude.
Holy shit. It's
well, that's
crazy.
100% what they were doing. 100% what they were doing.
Dude, I just don't even want to think about it. I don't want to think about all the, like, entities we'll never even know about that ride presidents around like a fucking horse. They just gallop around on them, just riding them around. We got another president. We did it. We lassoed another one. And that is so crazy to think about. Like a president who is being extorted. I think you're right, but god damn, that's sinister. Our understanding of democracy as like the president represents the people, it's like totally wrong. In fact, it's potentially someone being controlled by people you'll never meet or maybe never even knew existed. Ugh.
They would never, if you had an enormous organization that controls everything, you control everything in the country, would you really let a new person just run it every 4 years in whatever way they like?
Right.
Wouldn't you, if you're there forever, you're there forever. You're not there for 4 years. Wouldn't you make sure over time that you secured enough control that the president really is just sort of a figurehead?
So Epstein's blackmail business could also easily be a CIA operation, which would certainly explain why this whole case has been shrouded in so much secrecy and why it's so difficult to find out anything about it. It's a standard practice of the CIA to subcontract out to organized crime for its so-called wet projects, that is, assassinations and other illegal activities. And I go into the CIA's history of this in my series on how and why the CIA killed JFK. And it would be easy and standard for the CIA to kill Epstein before he went to trial, before too much investigation was done. We saw how the CIA used mob figure and CIA asset Jack Ruby to kill Lee Harvey Oswald in the basement of that Dallas police station with 60 police officers looking on, and how a very healthy Jack Ruby was suddenly infected with a super aggressive galloping cancer 6 weeks before his second trial. And we know that the CIA at that time was developing and had developed a bioweapon that causes this super aggressive galloping cancer. So again, here was Dan Bongino on the Epstein case, on the significance of the Epstein case before he took this job as deputy director of the CIA.
Listen, that Jeffrey Epstein story is a big deal. Please do not let that story go. Keep your eye on this.
But now Dan Bongino has changed his mind, I guess, after a few weeks on the job at the FBI. He's looked at the files, he said. But who prepared these files, right? Move along, everyone. Nothing to see here. Dan Bongino and Kash Patel are, of course, well aware of what happened to President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert F. Kennedy when they tried to take on the CIA. Yeah, Kash Patel is the director of the FBI now. Dan Bongino, the deputy director of the FBI. But as we've seen, that doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what the president thinks. They really have no control over the CIA or even the black box operations in the FBI, which are really CIA operations. President John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy found that out. Now, of course, I had hoped that the Trump administration, that Kash Patel, that Dan Bongino, that Attorney General Pam Bondi would take a blowtorch to the deeply corrupt and evil CIA, deep state, and military-industrial complex. But I also thought that, more likely than not, they wouldn't do much about it because they really can't. Predictably, we're not seeing much from Attorney General Pam Bondi either. She's a very nice lady who means well. So Dan Bongino and Kash Patel say that they've looked at the files. Nothing to see here. But who prepared these files? Well, until recently, the man in charge of the FBI field office in New York City was a man named James Dennehy. After Trump was elected in 2024, this is the guy who sent an email to his staff telling them to dig in.
Pam Bondi released a letter that she sent to Kash Patel, the new director of the FBI, which said, "I repeatedly questioned whether this was the full set of documents responsive to my request and was repeatedly assured by the FBI that we had received the full set of documents. Late yesterday, I learned from a source that the FBI field office in New York was in possession of thousands of pages of documents related to the investigation and indictment of Epstein. Despite my repeated requests, the FBI never disclosed the existence of these files. When you and I spoke yesterday, you were just as surprised as I was to learn this new information. I am also directing you to conduct an immediate investigation into why my order to the FBI was not followed." The head of the New York field office, the FBI field office, James Dennehy, ended up resigning.
And let's not forget that Obama's FBI director, James Comey's daughter, Maureen Comey, is still an assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. She worked on both the Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell cases. James Comey, Obama's FBI director, was of course one of the architects of the Russia hoax, and his daughter, Comey's daughter, Maureen Comey, was one of the lead prosecutors in the Jeffrey Epstein case, also in the Ghislaine Maxwell case, and is still an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. She's working for the Trump Justice Department. In fact, she's prosecuting the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking case, which has very similar parallels to the Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking case. Both Diddy and Epstein, I believe, were running blackmail operations as major businesses involving the sex trafficking of minors. So for the Epstein case, the FBI seized computers, surveillance videos, banking records, file cabinets, and photographs from all of Epstein's properties in New Mexico, the Virgin Islands, Palm Beach, Florida, and New York. Where is all this stuff? And look at all the powerful, very wealthy people involved with Jeffrey Epstein. Former President Bill Clinton took at least 26 trips on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express, including to Epstein's so-called Orgy Island. They also traveled together on the Lolita Express to Europe, Africa, and Asia, presumably to engage in the same kind of activity. And Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, as mentioned, was also a frequent guest of Jeffrey Epstein. Other famous Epstein guests include Prince Andrew, the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak, Victoria's Secret magnate, the billionaire Les Wexner, President Clinton's National Security Advisor, Sandy Berger, President Clinton's Treasury Secretary, Larry Summers, Joe Biden's CIA Director, William Burns, former Democrat Senate Majority Leader, George Mitchell, billionaire Ron Burkle. Donald Trump's name also appears on flight logs from back in the 1990s. Flight logs show that Trump traveled 7 times on Epstein's jet from Palm Beach, Florida, with his then-wife Marla Maples, daughter Tiffany, and son Eric. He was always on the plane with family members. There's no evidence that Trump knew about Epstein's sex trafficking operation, which might not have even existed at that time. That didn't come to light until the early 2000s, early to mid-2000s. And of course, just because you're on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet doesn't mean that you're engaging in crimes with Epstein. I mean, if someone asked me to ride on their private jet, I'm probably going to say sure. But there's a lot of mystery around how Jeffrey Epstein made all of his money, became worth hundreds of millions of dollars, became close to a billionaire. He somehow became the money manager for the billionaire Victoria's Secret magnate Les Wexner. Epstein even managed to get power of attorney over Wexner's assets. Epstein's background is really sketchy. Before this, in the early 1990s, Epstein was involved in a Ponzi scheme, in a famous Ponzi scheme called Towers Financial that bilked customers of $470 million. Epstein managed to escape prosecution somehow, but the founder of the company, who did go to prison, named Stephen Hoffenberg, said that Epstein was the architect of the scheme. Epstein was also a pretty key figure in the Iran-Contra scandal that nearly brought down the Reagan presidency. He was the middleman for getting weapons from a Saudi arms dealer named Adnan Khashoggi to the anti-communist guerrillas in Nicaragua through his connections with the Reagan administration, probably through Oliver North, who was the point man in the whole Iran-Contra operation. And it was during this period when Epstein probably became a CIA asset. And in 2008, President George W. Bush's Justice Department granted Epstein a sweetheart plea deal for sex trafficking, including involving minors. Epstein was sentenced to just 13 months in a cushy work release program. That should have gotten him 25 years in prison or more. But nope, 13 months of work release and he's back in business. And then we come back to this key fact that we just can't explain. How can there be only one conviction in a sex trafficking of minors case? That being of Ghislaine Maxwell. How can she be found guilty of sex trafficking if we don't know who her customers were? We know that Epstein was videotaping everything that was going on his properties, including the bedroom activity, including all the sex activity. We know that the FBI has all this video. So where is it? What is Attorney General Pam Bondi doing about it? Apparently nothing. And remember when Attorney General Pam Bondi promised that she'd be releasing all of the Epstein files, making them all public?
Scaring bad guys is something Cash has talked about a lot, and you have when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein and the people who are like predators in this country. Yeah. They've been given a pass, and a lot of Americans think these guys have got a pass for a long time, and maybe even are still being protected right now. Where are we at with the Jeffrey Epstein list, the documents? And Cash has made a lot of public statements about this. Where are we at?
I was briefed on that yesterday. I can't talk about that publicly, but President Trump has given a very strong directive, and that's going to be followed.
Wow. Okay. So
a lot of documents.
You said last week that you have the Epstein files on your desk. When can we see them, and what's taking so long to release them?
I do. Jesse, there are well over, this will make you sick, 200 victims. 200. So we have over 250 actually. So we have to make sure that their identity is protected and their personal information. But other than that, I think tomorrow, the personal information of victims. Other than that, I think tomorrow, Jesse, breaking news right now, you're going to see some Epstein information being released by my office.
What kind? Are we going to see who was on the flights? Are we going to see any evidence from what he recorded? Because he had all of his homes wired with recording devices.
Yeah. What you're going to see, hopefully tomorrow, is a lot of flight logs, a lot of names, a lot of information.
Then when she released these files in a big public display, it turned out that all the information that she released was information we had had for years.
But much of the material had been circulating in the public domain for years, including pilot logs from Epstein's plane and his so-called black book of names and addresses. Several conservative media figures were given early access during a visit to the White House, showing off binders and posing for pictures, some later posting how underwhelmed they were.
Go out on a limb here and say that thing was botched. She should have never opened her dadgum mouth and said, I'm sitting here with bragging, this thing's on my desk, and all she had allegedly was some very limited records. I think the thing was botched. I think somebody's in over their head. Yeah, somebody's going to lose their job. Dadgum, they should. But I don't think it'll get as high as it needs to. And that's why nobody trusts these things. Nobody trusts this swamp that is actually a sewer. And that's Washington, D.C., because of crap like this.
After this debacle, Bondi promised to release more files. Then we were told that the files had gone missing from the FBI. Now she says they aren't missing, that they're still reviewing the files.
James Comer said yesterday that all the Epstein files are missing. Can you confirm the status of them? They still haven't heard from you.
No, the FBI, they're reviewing, there are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child porn. And there are hundreds of victims. And no one victim will ever get released. It's just the volume, and that's what they're going through right now. The FBI is diligently going through that. I haven't seen that statement, but I'll call him later and find out.
So nothing's going to happen with the Epstein case. There's not going to be any prosecution of Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, whoever else was involved with Epstein. No prosecutions of Big Fish, because Epstein was probably, almost certainly, working for the CIA and Israeli intelligence. He was deep state. Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, these are all good people. I like them. I'm sure they're doing good things. But they're not going to touch this third rail because they don't want to end up like President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert F. Kennedy. I mean, if the CIA can take out President John F. Kennedy, they can certainly take out Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. And the CIA has gotten a lot more evil and has gained a lot more capabilities since then. The CIA can blackmail anyone. Google, after all, was founded with research grants from the CIA and the National Security Agency. Google is the CIA. This CIA knows everything about you through Google and the rest of big tech. Has all your emails, all your text messages, has recorded every keystroke you've ever made on your computer, has all your phone calls. Same with Microsoft, Apple, and all of big tech. They're all part of the military-industrial complex, all part of the CIA. Big tech is the eyes and ears of the CIA. The CIA actually doesn't have to kill you most of the time, 99% of the time. They only do that as a kind of final option. And if you want to know the incredible level of power that the CIA and military-industrial complex have, watch my videos on how and why the CIA killed JFK, which absolutely prove that the CIA did kill JFK and that Lee Harvey Oswald did not fire a shot. And watch my videos on how Lyndon Johnson killed Martin Luther King, and how James Earl Ray had nothing to do with the assassination. Lyndon Johnson was the CIA's replacement for JFK. And watch my video on how the CIA created Charles Manson, also the Unabomber. They were products of the CIA's MK-Ultra mind control experiments, which were trying to create human weapons. Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, of course, know all of this, and they have no choice but to be good soldiers for the deep state. The reason that Matt Gaetz had to be taken out is they didn't think they could control Matt Gaetz. Remember that? Matt Gaetz was going to be the Attorney General, but now we have Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi is a very nice person. I like her, but she's not going to take a blowtorch to the deep state. Tulsi Gabbard might. We'll see what happens to her. CIA and the deep state is just organized crime. If you get involved with organized crime, you'd better play ball. You better be a good soldier, or bad things are going to happen to you. I'm sure you remember Chuck Schumer's famous warning to President Trump in 2017 when President Trump was saying he was being framed by the CIA, that the CIA had created this Russia hoax in cooperation with the Hillary Clinton campaign.
But he's taking these shots, this antagonism, this taunting to the intelligence community.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you.
Of course, the Russia hoax turned out to be absolutely true. The CIA, the FBI, and the deep state were trying to overturn the results of the 2016 election. That was what that was all about. They wanted to install their person, Hillary Clinton. Notice also that Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, and Pam Bondi aren't doing much about the 2 assassination attempts on President Trump last summer during the lead-up to the 2024 election. Why aren't we getting more information about that? Well, because Matthew Crooks, would-be assassins Matthew Crooks and Wesley Ryan Ruth, were very likely low-level CIA assets. Similar in that regard to Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald was much higher level. I go into all this in this video here. During the early phases of the Ukraine war, Wesley Ryan Ruth was in Ukraine trying to recruit mercenary soldiers from Pakistan via Iran. Mysteriously, Wesley Ryan Ruth never served prison time, even though he had a 3-hour armed standoff with police in 2001 in Greensboro, North Carolina, with a fully automatic machine gun. He never served prison time for that. He was also found with an explosive device and charged with possessing a weapon of mass destruction. He never served any prison time for that either. On September 15, 2024, Ruth then drives from Greensboro, North Carolina, and somehow ends up in this perfect location to shoot President Trump on his golf course. This spot, this one point of vulnerability left unsecured by the Secret Service. Ruth waited here for 11 hours with his scoped SKS rifle, undetected by Secret Service or any kind of electronic surveillance. How could Ruth have found this location without help, living in Greensboro, North Carolina? And the only reason that President Trump is still alive today is because an alert rank-and-file Secret Service agent who is with Trump happened to see Ruth's rifle poking through this chain-link fence, so started shooting at Ruth. So Ruth dropped the rifle and ran. Ruth was arrested about 45 minutes later on I-95. We had similar security lapses, actually even more egregious, in the assassination attempt on Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, a few weeks earlier.
Take a look at what happened.
Matthew Crooks oddly appeared in a BlackRock commercial BlackRock manages about $12 trillion in assets, has deep connections to the CIA, the military-industrial complex, and the globalist power structure. How odd and coincidental that Matthew Crooks appears in this BlackRock ad. Both Crooks and Ruth have the hallmarks of being projects of the CIA's MK-Ultra mind control program, a program to create human weapons similar to the Unabomber. But we're not hearing anything more from Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, or Pam Bondi about these assassination attempts. Let's look again at Dan Bongino's body language when he tells us that he's looked at all the FBI files on the Epstein case and nothing to see there.
He killed himself. You want me to? I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
It's all pretty disappointing, but also very predictable. I can't really blame them for wanting to stay alive, and maybe they're being blackmailed. Just easier to go along with the program. They've also somehow managed to keep Ghislaine Maxwell quiet. She's been sentenced to 20 years in prison. Why isn't she speaking out? My guess is they've told her she'll be out in a few years if she just plays ball, and they'll take care of her. They might also be threatening her family members. Her parents are dead, but she has siblings. Her father was the billionaire Robert Maxwell, who had a sprawling media empire across the UK and the United States. He died mysteriously by supposedly falling off his yacht in 1991. So Ghislaine probably doesn't want something like that to happen to her, and she's being given a cushy life in prison. And then, of course, we have the history of mysterious deaths surrounding the Clintons, upwards of 50 or 60. For example, we have one of Bill Clinton's White House aides named Mark Middleton, who also had ties to Jeffrey Epstein. On May 7, 2022, Mark Middleton, was found hanging by his neck from a tree with a shotgun blast through the chest. His death was ruled a suicide. I'll probably do a video at some point on the many mysterious deaths of people close to the Clintons who had insider knowledge of Clinton crimes, including Vince Foster, Ed Willie, James McDougal, Ed Parks, Herschel Friday, Victor Reiser, Paul Welsher, Danny Casolaro, John Parnell Walker, Kevin Ives, Don Henry, Paula Grober, many others. Vince Foster was found dead in Fort Marcy Park on July 20, 1993 with a gunshot to the head. He was the deputy White House counsel who was working on defending the Clintons in the Whitewater corruption scandal. He had been a longtime personal lawyer for the Clintons. His death was investigated by the Park Police, not by the FBI. Not that it would have made any difference, but his murder was investigated by the Park Police. Investigators were made to wait outside Foster's White House office while Clinton staffers removed all files and computers from Foster's office. And Bill Clinton's business partner in the crooked Whitewater project, James McDougal, conveniently died of a heart attack in prison while awaiting trial. And the list goes on and on of Clinton associates who were murdered, died in car crashes out in the middle of nowhere, and so on. And I'm certainly not the only one who has noticed this. People are not saying this about other presidents. For example, people are not saying this about close associates of Barack Obama. We aren't seeing a lot of people who are close to Barack Obama ending up dead. We did have that chef who died under mysterious circumstances. So that's one person, but it's not 50 or 60 people. I'll do a detailed video on the Clinton body count at some point, and all the corruption at the Clinton Foundation and Clinton's so-called nonprofits. Most recently, we had the death of a key Epstein witness named Virginia Giuffre, the primary witness in the Netflix series on the Epstein case. First, they tried to kill her by smashing into her car with a bus, badly injuring her. This bus hit her at a high rate of speed from the rear in a rural area. When that didn't work, they seem to have suicided her 5 weeks later. No charges filed against the school bus driver who hit her from behind, hit her from the rear. He claimed he just nicked her car, but she somehow ended up in a hospital like this on life support. Then she supposedly committed suicide 5 weeks later. That was the official ruling. A bit hard to believe that she committed suicide given that she had just received a $12 million payout from Epstein fanboy Prince Andrew. And interestingly, Virginia Giuffre had posted these words in 2019 before her Twitter account was canceled by the old Twitter. She wrote, quote, "I am making it publicly known that in no way, shape, or form am I suicidal. If something happens to me, for the sake of my family, do not let this go away and help me protect them. Too many evil people want to see me quieted." End quote. I notice also that President Trump has suddenly become very quiet about all this deep state stuff. He doesn't talk anymore about getting to the bottom of the 2 assassination attempts against him. He doesn't seem to be pushing very hard anymore for answers on this. Everyone, including President Trump, now seems to be shutting up about the 2 assassination attempts on then-candidate Donald Trump. Maybe he's thinking better not stir up trouble, as Chuck Schumer warned.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you.
Well, that's all I have for you today. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments section below. And be sure to hit the like and subscribe button, as this helps me with the algo. Also, check out my books on Amazon. One is Bitcoin, A Beginner's Guide to Your Ultimate Protection from the Government and the Deep State, because Bitcoin is not under the control of government, not under the control of humans, which is what makes Bitcoin unconfiscatable money. It's also the only decentralized crypto assets. All the other crypto assets are under human control. Bitcoin separates money from state and enables you to be your own bank. Bitcoin is the Second Amendment for your money. I call it freedom money. If all hell breaks loose here and we become a totalitarian dictatorship, Bitcoin allows you to carry your wealth with you to wherever freedom might still exist. Bitcoin also protects you from the government's fiat money printer, because there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins for 8 billion people. This book also explains why the rest of the crypto world is garbage. The rest of the crypto world is just trying to surf in the wake of Bitcoin's success. My other book that might interest you is Win Life: Success Skills Schools Don't Teach. This book is aimed mainly at young people in their 20s and 30s, but should be of interest to anyone interested in getting into the top 1% of income earners. This book will also help you achieve more modest goals. For example, maybe you just want to lose 20 pounds. This book will help you do that as well. This book will help you achieve most of what you want to achieve in life.